وما خلقنا السماء والأرض وما بينهما لاعبين لو أردنا أن نتخذ لهوا لاتخذناه من لدنا إن كنا فاعلين بل نقذف بالحق على الباطل فيدمغه فإذا هو زاهق ولكم الويل مما تصفون وله من في السماوات والأرض ومن عنده لا يستكبرون عن عبادته ولا يستحسرون يسبحون الليل والنهار لا يفترون أم اتخذوا آلهة من الأرض هم ينشرون لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا فسبحان الله رب العرش عما يصفون لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون أم اتخذوا من دونه آلهة قل هاتوا برهانكم هذا ذكر من معي وذكر من قبلي بل أكثرهم لا يعلمون الحق فهم معرضون وما أرسلنا من قبلك من رسول إلا نوحي إليه أنه لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدون وقالوا اتخذ الرحمن ولدا سبحانه بل عباد مكرمون لا يسبقونه بالقول وهم بأمره يعملون يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يشفعون إلا لمن ارتضى وهم من خشيته مشفقون ومن يقل منهم إني إله من دونه فذلك نجزيه جهنم كذلك نجزي الظالمين أولم ير الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي أفلا يؤمنون وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا وهم عن آياتها معرضون وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون وما جعلنا لبشر من قبلك الخلد أفإن مت فهم الخالدون كل نفس ذائقة الموت ونبلوكم بالشر والخير فتنة وإلينا ترجعون.
So what then are the answers to these questions? And I said this is very important for us to understand. Why? Because in Surah Yusuf, the 12th chapter of the Quran, verse 106, Allah says there, وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. Most of those who believe in God, in a law, commit idolatry. They actually are worshiping others along with or besides God. So, let us then look at our first big question. Do you agree with those who say that belief is a matter of blind faith? Now, that question or that statement is usually made by the atheists. They say, our belief that there is no God is the logical belief. Those of you who believe in God, who are caught up in this mass delusion about a God, your belief is based on blind faith. Meaning you can't prove it. It's just faith. You believe. It's not logical. There are no logical principles that you can bring to bear. If we accept that, then we really don't know who our Lord is. First and foremost, in response to that claim, we have to say that those who invented logic, who are the people who invented logic? The Greeks. That is, they invented a set of rules which governed logical statements and arguments. Not that they really actually invented logic. People knew logic before the Greeks came along. However, the Greeks set rules which people then studied even till today in universities. Classes in logic are given, taken from the early Greek philosophers. Well, the leading amongst the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, if belief in God were illogical, then they should have been amongst those who didn't believe in God. However, what we find instead is that both Plato and Aristotle believed in God. And they argued for God's existence logically. They argued for God's existence logically. That there was logic behind it. After arguing logically, they came to the conclusion there must be a God. Plato argued from design, that design indicates a designer. That was his argument. And this is the most common argument found mentioned throughout the Quran. Allah calls human beings to reflect on His creation and how it has been created. It is a sign of God in and of itself. And we have to say that it is reasonable and logical to come to this conclusion that design indicates a designer. It is normal and natural for us when we walk along the beach and we see a footprint in the sand. It is normal and logical for us to conclude that some human being stepped here.
A huge sphere of 12.756 kilometers in radius is moving rapidly in the space in a speed of almost 68,000 miles per hour. It is called the Earth. The Earth is surrounded by an atmosphere of 5 layers consisting of hydrogen, oxygen, and inert gases. At the same time, the Earth rotates around its axis at 1,000 miles per hour. I will not speak about the greatness of the universe or the incredible galaxies, which the Earth looks like a speck of dust on the foothill of Everest in comparison to them. and I will not speak about the countless numbers of light years with endless zeros. I have heard a lot of talking from the atheists in the world, but the thing they say, and I did not understand until now, is that they do not believe in God because they cannot see Him. I do not know how they cannot see Him, while I can see the creation of God all the time, in every inch around me. Why does water have very unique properties in comparison to all other liquids? Why does Earth rotate in definite speed and in an accurate angle? Example, 23.5 degrees. Why is the Sun located at such an enormous distance and has such high temperature? Why the atmosphere has certain components in specific measures? When you ponder on the answers to these questions, you will see the great Creator revealing Himself clearly. The Earth rotates around its axis at 1,000 miles per hour. Assuming that this speed decreases to 200 miles per hour, for instance, our night and day times would be 10 times longer. The temperature at the daytime would continue to increase till we burn, and the temperature at the night would continue to decrease until we freeze. Humans would not be able to organize their time, sleep, and work during the very long daylights or the darkness of night. All of the measures in this planet are regularized and adjusted for the benefits of one creature, the only creature that has a mind capable of understanding and realizing. Is there a message to us from the One who has created all this? Why the only liquid necessary for life is also the only liquid that decreases in density when it freezes and then it floats. If water was exactly like the rest of liquids in terms of characteristics, the seas, rivers, and oceans would totally freeze, and fish and animals of seas and oceans would die. Without the sun, we would not be able to live on this planet. It is a sterilizer and light. The temperature on the surface of the sun is 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the distance between the sun and Earth is nearly 93 million miles. This enormous distance is constant. It never changes, whether to increase or decrease. If it decreases and the sun becomes nearer to the Earth, half of the distance, for example, the paper and wood will immediately burn. And if the distance increases to the double, the severe coldness which will happen because of the big distance will end life on Earth. If you realize these facts, you will also realize that there is a merciful Lord that organized such delicate, punctual messiahs on our planet in a system that suits us in a specific way to make our lives easy and smooth. This Earth rotates around the Sun in an angle of 23.5 degrees. This leads to the succession of seasons, and it also causes the suitability of the land for cultivation and housing. If Earth was not rotating in such accurate angle, the seasons would remain constant in every part of the Earth, and darkness would cover the two poles. The steam of seas will travel to the north and south. The snowy mountains will spread in some regions, and the arid deserts in other regions. The only way to avoid this is the rotation of the Earth in the space in an angle of 23.5 degrees. If the atmosphere has less thickness or different components, the meteors that we see bright at night, moving in the space 90 times faster than the bullet, would have penetrated the atmosphere, burning everything on Earth. The amazing thing is that the atmosphere only allows very nominal amounts of solar radiation important for the growth of plants, elimination of germs, and other needs for the Earth. Is nature capable of regulating all these specific measurements and definite dates to suit us? This balance of quantities needed for the life on Earth is very amazing. The air consists of 6 gases, 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. Why these gases were formed in such accurate percentages to be suitable to our lives and exactly as needed. If this existence was not under the dominance of a mighty, great, and wise Creator, then why does it have such amazing, balanced soul? As if everything is just gathered to play a harmonious symphony. This symphony is only for us. The answer is quite simple. He is the ever-wise. He is the ever-magnificent. He is the ever-great. He is the ever-merciful. He is the omnipotent. He is the generous. He is the ever-affectionate. He is the ever-glorious, the eternal owner of sovereignty, the owner of majesty and bounty. He is Allah.
قل لمن الأرض ومن فيها إن كنتم تعلمون سيقولون لله قل أفلا تذكرون قل من رب السماوات السبع ورب العرش العظيم سيقولون لله قل أفلا تتقون قل من بيده ملكوت كل شيء وهو يجير ولا يجار عليه إن كنتم تعلمون سيقولون لله قل فأنى تسحرون.
The apple of Macintosh dazzled the world. It was invented by Steve Jobs. But who invented the apple we eat? The stethoscope. It was invented by the French physician René Laennec in 1818. But who created the ear in which we hear everything? The calculator was invented by the Frenchman Blaise Pascal in 1639. Who created the human brain, which equals 1 million of advanced calculators working at the same time? The electric light bulb, which we turn to lighten a room. It was invented by Thomas Edison in 1879. So, who created the self-illuminating sun, which radiates the whole world? The plane. It was invented by Wilbur Wright in 1903. But who invented the systems in birds that enable them to fly long distances? He is Allah, the creator of everything. Look for him. You will find him. KnowingAllah.com.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
One of the really amazing things about Islam, and what caused me as a young man in North America to accept it as a way of life, is not only does Islam encourage us to accept the existence of our Creator, but also it pushes us to look into His creation, at the variance in colors and languages and cultures, and respect the power of this divine force through his creation.
One of the most basic facts in Islam and most important beliefs is that there is a creator. And one of the ways of recognizing his existence and mightiness is by studying creation. The Creator said to those who believe and those who do not believe in the Quran,
"In the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of the night and the day, there are signs for people of understanding." After deep thinking, many ancient and modern philosophers reached the fact of the existence of a supreme being who created this universe and is maintaining it continuously. Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher and student of Plato, tried to demonstrate this fact, saying, "We hold then that the God is a living being, eternal, most good, and therefore life and a continuous eternal existence belong to the God, for that is what the God is."
If people look around them, they will see the intelligent design everywhere and in their own selves. Take the eye as an example. The light reflects on the object and then reflects on our eye retina, where it is transferred into pulses to a place in the brain called the center of vision. And it is probably one of the darkest places in the human body because it is completely insulated from light. It never saw the light. And all the images that we view in our lives are formed in this part of the body, the center of vision. We see all these bright, sharp, three-dimensional images in this part of the body. While thousands and thousands of engineers in TV factories are trying to come up with an image as sharp, bright, and clear, but still they cannot. And if someone claimed that TVs that we have at home just came by chance, atoms accumulated and made those TVs, no one will believe it. But still, some people believe that the vision system came by chance. Same applies for hearing, taste, the way kidneys work, the way livers work, etc., etc.
The Creator said in the Quran, "Were they created without a creator, or were they their own creators?"
René Descartes, a noted French philosopher and one of the most influential thinkers of modern times, was led to belief in God through doubt. He doubted that there is God, but doubt meant to him that he thinks, which in turn meant that he exists, which therefore meant that he was created. And since he did not create himself, therefore someone else must have created him, and that one should be the source of life.
Can I be the author of my being? Or can I conserve myself at the present time? If this would be the case, then the idea of a perfect substance would be caused by my own mind. In order for this to be, I should have to be God himself. As this, I am clearly not. Infinity is before finitude.
Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential thinkers of modern times, who is regarded as the last major philosopher of the Age of Enlightenment, was impressed by all the variations, numerations, and synchronizations in this world that make the existence of an omnipotent supreme being a fact.
This present world presents to us so immeasurable a stage of variety, order, fitness, and beauty. Whether we follow it up in the infinity of space or in its unlimited division, that even with the little knowledge which our poor understanding has been able to gather, all language, with regard to so many inconceivable wonders, loses its vigor, all the numbers their power of measuring, and all our thoughts their necessary determinations, so that our judgment of the whole is lost in a speechless but all the more eloquent astonishment. And in another message which encourages people to reflect upon the signs of the Creator in the universe and in themselves, the Creator says, We will show them our signs in the universe and in their own selves until it becomes manifest to them that this is the truth.
Bring 12 marbles, number them from 1 to 12, and then put them in a bag, shake the bag and close your eyes and pull out marble number 1. And then pull them all out one by one. Do you know what is the chance of doing that? You need to try about 479 million times to pull them all out in order. So if putting 12 marbles in order is that impossible, what do you think the chances of having this entire universe come by chance, with all its systems, with all the precision, the synchronizations, the variations, the infinite numerations? People think that this can come by chance.
Fred Hoyle, a famous English mathematician, expressed the impossibility of formation of higher life forms without a creator. The chance that higher life forms might have emerged by chance is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from materials therein.
Every evolutionist's attempt in the 20th century to account for the origin of life have ended in failure. Jeffrey Bada, a professor of geochemistry and a leading advocate of the theory of evolution, confesses this fact in the February 1998 issue of Earth, one of the leading periodicals of evolutionist literature.
Today, as we leave the 20th century, we still face the biggest problem that we had when we entered the 20th century. How did life originate on Earth?
After lengthy studies and several experiments, the famous French biologist Louis Pasteur refuted the foundation that lays ground for the theory of evolution.
Can matter organize itself? No. Today there is no circumstance known under which one could affirm that microscopic beings have come into the world without parents resembling themselves.
About 15 billion years ago, there were no stars in the sky. There wasn't even a sky. All that existed was the primordial fireball.
Then, something happened. In a flash, everything suddenly expanded. This was how it all began. The first moment of existence. What we now call the Big Bang. Big Bang. Big Bang. Big Bang. Big Bang.
At the beginning of the 20th century, scientists believed that the universe had always existed, that matter energy was infinite. It had always been around. The model is called the steady state model, because the model of the universe that it's been around forever basically doesn't change. The universe is steady state. But what happened in the last 100 years is that model has been blown away because of the evidence. Observations now suggest, as you all know, that the universe began some 12 to 15 billion years ago. The first evidence that the universe had a beginning is the expanding universe.
Researchers wanted to believe in a universe that always was and always will be, eternal. But galaxies flying away from each other meant that once, long ago, they were clumped together. It meant something started them moving. The universe had a beginning. Today, it's called the Big Bang Theory.
This was first discovered in 1929 by Edwin Hubble, and it's the first evidence that the universe had a beginning. The second evidence the universe had a beginning is the cosmic background radiation.
The discovery of the cosmic background radiation was a fatal blow to those who wanted to believe in an eternal universe. The Big Bang proponents had won.
Now, the final evidence for the origin of the universe is the relative abundance of light elements. It's very clear now that the universe had an origin, and scientists have become to accept this. In fact, the equations of general relativity that Einstein developed had an origin of the universe. When Einstein developed his equations of general relativity, they showed that there should be an expansion of the universe and an origin, and Einstein didn't like that. He added something called a cosmological constant which he later realized was not there. When we saw that the universe was expanding, that there really was an origin, he threw out the cosmological constant. He said that that was the biggest mistake of his scientific career, was introducing that, was introducing that, was introducing that, was introducing that, was introducing that. But when this Big Bang model was first proposed in the early part of the 20th century, it was received with great skepticism by the scientific community. Because the scientific community knew that the Big Bang opened up the possibility of having a beginning and a creator and someone who began it.
Have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Why everything exists instead of just nothing? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and uncaused.
For example, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist on a radio program, he said the universe is just there and that's all.
But the astrophysical evidence indicates that the universe began to exist in a great explosion called the Big Bang 15 billion years ago. Most laymen do not appreciate that not only were all matter and energy created in that event, but physical space and time themselves. This is of utmost importance, for it implies, as the Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle points out, that the Big Bang theory requires the creation of the universe from nothing. Now, this tends to be very awkward for the atheist, for as Anthony Kenny of Oxford University urges, a proponent of the Big Bang theory, at least if he is an atheist, must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But surely that doesn't make sense. Out of nothing, nothing comes.
Even atheist philosophers such as David Hume, he wrote in a letter, "I never asserted to absurd proposition as that anything might arise without a cause." Similarly, P.J. Zort, in his publication About Time, said, "If there is anything we find inconceivable, it is that something could arise from nothing."
So, where did the universe come from? Why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. We can summarize our argument thus far as follows. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
It doesn't mean it's God, doesn't mean it's Jesus, doesn't mean it's Allah, it doesn't mean anything. It just means there's a cause for the universe. So we ask another question, what is the nature of this cause? And the nature of this cause, upon conceptual analysis, which means critical thinking about this cause, we come to some startling conclusions.
So the cause of the universe must be immaterial beyond space and time. Beyond space and time. Now there are only two things that can fit in this category. The first, abstract objects, and the second, an embodied.
I'm going to be arguing the negative. God is not a delusion, on the contrary. God is very much a reality, and I'll be presenting a powerful cumulative argument to suggest that.
Give us a taster of it.
Okay, well, there's a very powerful argument called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. It's based on using God as the best explanation for the origin of the universe. This idea that the universe has an origin and has a finite past is supported philosophically and also scientifically. I'll also be presenting God as the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe. It was commonly believed that Darwin's theory of evolution pretty much destroyed the design argument. You've probably heard this argument where we look at complex organisms and we infer that they're being designed. That's slightly, let's say, quite true. But however, we have now good evidence of design. Where is this? Scientists have found out that the initial conditions of the universe were delicately and exquisitely fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life. So I'll be presenting this argument. It's basically an argument way before even evolution can even start to begin. Also, I'll be arguing that objective morality only really makes sense if God exists. So if God exists, then objective morality exists. If objective morality exists, therefore God exists. I'll also be using a unique argument, which is that God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. What we find is that the Quran itself cannot be produced by normal means of Arabic style literature. And that my conclusion is that the Quran is outside of the productive capacity of the Arabic language. And God is the best explanation for that.
Now, I've never understood why the arguments for evolution were held to, as it were, negate the case for God. My attitude is, if there's been evolution, then God must have made the evolution. My attitude is, as I look around at the butterfly's wings, at the hummingbird, at the baby, at the many great and beautiful things in the world, and many great and beautiful things that humankind has done and is doing, and when I take my telescope and look up at the moon and the stars and contemplate the hundreds of millions of worlds and stars out there, the idea that all this came from nothing is much more far-fetched than the idea that there is a supreme creator. Don't you think?
Yeah, well, Dawkins has this idea that the very fact that evolution is true, that it negates God. Well, this is kind of an elementary mistake in philosophy. Even if we said that evolution was true, the most that it could do is undermine the biblical and the Quranic understanding of creation.
Well, maybe the biblical words on the page do not convey the proper meaning that they were intended to convey.
Yes, I would agree with you. I mean, that's a perspective. However, if someone did actually hold to the view that evolution was false and that God created everything by his own very hands, what I'm saying here is that even if Dawkins was right, all he would do with this argument is undermine the creation story. That's all that he will undermine, not that God does not exist. Do you see that point?
I do indeed.
Yeah.
I do indeed. And they say to me, atheists say to me, that my belief in God is far-fetched. I'm arguing that it is a stretch of the imagination, and we don't know. It's a mystery. We don't know the answer to all questions.
Sure.
But that it's much more far-fetched that all of this wondrousness somehow came from nothing.
Absolutely, I would hold to that too. I think even if we said that the idea of God is far-fetched, which I don't think it is, because even Richard Dawkins, the title is God a Delusion. It took him 400 pages to show that God was a delusion, which kind of tells you that he's not. But even if we said God was far-fetched, compared to what the atheists want us to believe, what do they want us to believe? They want us to believe that the universe just popped into existence 13 billion years ago without a cause, and then it was delicately fine-tuned, exquisitely fine-tuned all by itself, and then that's it. That's what they want us to believe.
It's a ridiculous idea.
Absolutely.
Because, of course, for something to pop into existence, the material to pop has to exist in the first place, and must therefore have been created.
Exactly. In philosophy, we call this a metaphysical principle, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, the Kalam cosmological argument, which I think is one of the most powerful arguments, has two premises. The first is that God, whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the second, that the universe began to exist. And therefore, logically, necessarily, the universe has a cause. Now, the funny thing is that atheists don't deny that the universe began to exist. They deny the first principle, which is that anything that begins to exist needs a cause. Now, but that would just make things inexplicable. Why don't we have right now, whilst we're speaking now, a giraffe popping up at our homes now, or a tiger popping up over there, or a lamppost appearing in this studio right now? That would just be absurd. But this is the depth of what they have to hold on to deny God.
Dr. Craig, one of the objections which has been raised is the first law of thermodynamics. the rule that matter and energy can only be rearranged, or in other words, that matter is neither being created nor destroyed.
Yeah. What's funny about this objection is that this is not an objection to the existence of God. This would be an objection to the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. It would show that the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe is false, because according to that theory, all matter and energy, even space and time themselves, came into being at the moment of the Big Bang, and are therefore not eternal. They haven't always been there in the past. So if these fellows were right, all contemporary cosmologists who believe in the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe would be contradicting the laws of thermodynamics, and that's hardly the case. Why? Well, because the laws of thermodynamics, in particular the law of the conservation of matter and energy, only applies once the universe comes into being. It applies at every moment, at every time, and every point in the universe. But it doesn't apply to the origin of the universe itself. And that's why cosmologists don't consider that the law of conservation of energy and mass is violated by the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. In fact, the atheist fellow mentioned the laws of thermodynamics. He might have wanted to talk about the second law of thermodynamics, which says that in a closed system, things tend toward increasing disorder. Now, the universe on the atheistic view is just a gigantic closed system, because it is everything there is, and there's nothing outside it. And what that implies is that given sufficient time, everything in the universe would grind down to a state of maximum disorder. So if the universe has existed for infinite time from eternity past, why is it that we don't find ourselves in this sort of thermodynamically disordered state? I think that the best answer to that is that the universe has not existed forever. It began a finite time ago in a low entropy condition, and the thermodynamic clock has been running ever since then. So the evidence of thermodynamics itself suggests that the universe and matter and energy are not infinite or eternal in the past, but had an absolute beginning.
To remind ourselves of the argument again, we have premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And from that, we draw the conclusion that the universe had a cause. The universe had a cause. The universe had a cause.
So we ask another question: what is the nature of this cause? And the nature of this cause, upon conceptual analysis, which means critical thinking about this cause, we come to some startling conclusions. This cause must be one. The reason for this is because if we use the philosophical principle Occam's razor, which posits that we do not multiply entities beyond necessity, then we conclude it must be one. This cause must be uncaused, as we have already discussed the absurdity of an infinite regress of events, similarly with causes. This cause must be immaterial, because it created the sum of all matter, which is the universe itself. Significantly, brothers, sisters and friends, this cause must be personal. The reason I'm saying this is how else can an eternal cause bring into an existence a finite effect, the universe that had a beginning in time? It must have chosen the universe to come into existence, and choice indicates a will, and a will indicates a personality. So, we have concluded the traditional view on God, that a transcendental, immaterial, uncaused, eternal being exists. Being exists. Being exists. Being exists. I have to say that his conclusion that God almost certainly does not exist is almost a joke. Because my main issue is how does he conclude that God doesn't exist from the above statements? It seems to me that his conclusion just jumps out of thin air. To infer that God does not exist just shows how invalid his argument is. It seems to me that the only delusion is Dawkins' conviction that his argument is a very serious argument against God's existence. Now, if we can conclude anything from Dawkins' argument, it would be that we should not infer that God exists just based upon design of the universe. However, even if that is true, and I don't believe it's true, but even if we take it to be true, we can believe in God's existence from other arguments. For example, the argument for morality, the argument from the miracle of the Quran, the cosmological argument, the argument from personal experience, and the argument from consciousness. Now, if we were to accept all of Dawkins' statements, it would not be enough to reject the idea that God exists, and it certainly does not provide a positive case for atheism.
In my experience, I think there are quite a number of different arguments for the existence of God. Let me just list some of them that I've defended in my work. One would be the contingency argument that holds that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists rather than nothing. A second would be the Kalam cosmological argument, which argues that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at some time in the finite past. God brought the universe into being from nothing. A third argument would be the design argument, which holds that God is the best explanation for the remarkable fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life. Another argument would be the moral argument, that God is the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties in the world. I would also think that the ontological argument for God's existence is a sound argument, which argues that the very possibility of God's existence implies his actuality, and that therefore, if God is even possible, it follows that God exists. And finally, as I said, I think we can know that God exists through personally experiencing him as a kind of properly basic belief, in the same way that I know that the external world exists or that the past is real. I can know that God exists in that same sort of immediate, non-inferential way. So that would just be a list of various arguments for God's existence that I think are sound and persuasive arguments, and that I've defended in detail in my written work.
See, this is the thing, right? Because we're born in the West, in Britain.
Yeah.
Religion gets attacked all the time. You have Richard Dawkins. You've heard of Richard Dawkins, yeah? Yeah, I call him Richard Dawkins, yeah? He's a bit of a crazy guy trying to like attack religions and blame everything on religions and stuff, and there's no proof for God.
Yeah.
Let me address two things here. First and foremost, we are brought up thinking that everything that we must verify has to be touch and feel.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something. If God could be touched and felt and seen, would that be God?
No, no, you mean.
Would that be
It
God?
wouldn't really be a test of belief, would it? Because you would know.
It's not even just a belief, because God actually says there's good reasons to believe in him. For example, look, do you believe you had a great grandma?
No.
You believe
yeah, but I mean, there's obviously, I know that because obviously I'm here now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but that's exactly the point. Have you ever seen your great grandma? You don't have access to her DNA.
I know scientifically, I would have to have one to be here.
Well, no. See, that's the point. Using the terminology here, scientifically, you have no clue. You have no clue. Scientifically, you're just dumb on this position. Or we're dumb on this position, because what does science say? Science say we can only verify the physical world and things that we can touch and feel. This is the non-verifiable thing.
Yeah.
The only way you know you got a great grandma is because you're here. You've made a logical, rational decision, not based on the physical world, based on necessity. If it's necessary your great-great-great-great-grandmother existed in order for you to be here. You can't see her, but if someone says she never existed, you say, get lost, man, you're crazy. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
So the point is, we don't need physical evidence all the time to come to conclusions. Exactly the same thing with God. As you said, cause and effect, creator and created. Let's put it this way. Everything in the universe, dude, that begins to exist, okay, if I just popped like this, here I am, I just popped into existence, has a cause. You know it must have came from somewhere. Everything that begins, that starts to exist, always has a cause. Number two, the universe, without a shadow of a doubt now, began to exist. Based on philosophy, mathematics, Big Bang. You know about the Big Bang, yeah?
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's not that thing after too many curries, right? Yeah, the Big Bang, okay? So from all this, we know the universe began to exist. So what logically follows? Therefore, the universe has a cause. So we just say, right, without a doubt, we know the universe has a cause. what is the nature of this cause? Well, if you create the universe, it can't be part of the universe. Because if it's part of the universe, then that would mean the universe existed and didn't exist at the same time.
Madness.
Does that make sense?
No.
That's just crazy.
Madness.
Can Abu Bakr exist and not exist at the same time?
Don't make no
Although
sense.
we may want him not to exist. Because he talks a lot, yeah. Yeah, I'm kidding. So there's that. It must be one. Because they're knocking on the door, we don't assume there's Manchester United football team behind the door, right? We say it's one person, isn't it? Yeah? It's the most logical explanation. We know he must be all powerful. He didn't create a grain of sand, he created the whole universe, right? Yeah. And we know it must be uncreated. Because some people say, well, who created God? It must be uncreated. Why?
Don't know why.
But let me give you an example. Say I want to shoot you, yeah?
Yeah.
Good style like this, yeah? Yeah? Hackney style. But before I could shoot, I have to ask Abu Bakr for permission. Abu Bakr, can I shoot the geezer? He says, wait, I need to ask someone behind me to shoot. And that guy has to ask permission too. If that goes on forever, could I shoot you?
No. Impossible.
Exactly the same thing with the universe. The question of saying who created God is equivalent of saying there is no creation. Because you need a final point. Because if it went on forever, we would never have creation in the first place. So look what we've just done, just very simply. We've said there's a cause for the universe. It must be one, powerful, and uncreated. This is exactly what the Quran says. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ Allahu Samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Say God is one, unique, eternal, self-sufficient. He begets not, nor was he begotten. He's uncreated, and there is nothing like him. He's immaterial. He's outside of the universe. Yeah. So just using our aql in Islam is our intellect, reflection, as the Quran always tells us to reflect. He uses the word yatafakkarun for those who reflect, because the Quran is for reflecting human beings. So we come to the conclusion that there must be a God. For me, I think that's irrefutable evidence there. Yeah. We could even go slowly through it again, because they were very basic concepts, weren't they?
Yeah.
So there's evidence for it. Yeah, there's evidence for it. And then what I would say now is, is God an absentee landlord? He just give you the keys and will go away. No. How could we apply something to God that we never apply to ourselves? I got a BlackBerry, right? What came with my BlackBerry? A manual came with my BlackBerry. Yeah. Human beings made this, and they made the manual. So we make manual for things. We're saying God wouldn't give us guidance? We're actually being saying lesser for the being that created the whole universe? We must be chiefs if we think that, man. We must be crazy. So the point is, it only makes sense that he gave us revelation. Now the question is, what is the revelation? That's a profound point we need to be talking about.
Sorry to cut you there, because I've got a few...
Cosmologist's point of view, many would take the same data and not come to your conclusion. They would say that there is some inherent thing in the universe, some laws that caused, that there's either an unending series of causes, or that first singularity kind of was rolled into existence by itself in some way, or some cosmic foam emerged, and each singularity is the product of this cosmic foam coming into existence, and suddenly one of them in an asymmetry explodes into a Big Bang, and this has been going on forever and ever. So each Big Bang that we see may look like it has a singularity, but in fact this has been going on forever and ever. We don't need any God.
Well, certainly those attempts have been made. But in one sense, the history of 20th century cosmology has been the history of one failed attempt after another to avert the absolute beginning predicted in the standard Big Bang model. We've seen the steady state model, we've seen oscillating models of the universe, we've seen vacuum fluctuation models, chaotic inflationary models, quantum gravity models, most recently the so-called ekpyrotic cyclical models of the universe, all of these attempting to avoid the absolute beginning predicted in the standard model. And one after another, these theories have either been falsified by the data or shown to be mathematically inconsistent, or else they have been shown to imply the very beginning of the universe that they sought to avoid. So I think that the prevailing view among contemporary cosmologists is that the universe cannot be eternal in the past, but that there is a past space-time boundary that represents the absolute beginning of the cosmos.
I think that some of those arguments would say, though, that you can't determine that this recent experience of a Big Bang is once you go beyond that, either a membrane, different dimensions, or some of these different theories could have oscillations before the Big Bang that we'd never have access to, and maybe that's non-falsifiable, but I don't think those are eliminated.
Well, you're alluding, I think, there to Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turok's so-called brain cosmology, which is an attempt to exploit string theory to develop an eternally oscillating universe in higher dimensions. And they tried to extend this infinitely into the past. But what was discovered in 2003, in the fall of that year, by three cosmologists, Alexander Vilenkin, Arvind Borde, and Alan Guth, the father of inflationary cosmology, through their theorem, they were able to demonstrate that even these models cannot be extended infinitely into the past, but that there has to be a past boundary at some point that represents the beginning of the universe. So even these brain cosmologies and higher dimensional cosmologies, which are really very metaphysical in character, have been shown to be non-infinitely extendable into the past. That is to say that they must have a past boundary. So while the case is by no means open and shut, I mean, the very nature of science is that its results are always provisional. They're always tentative. I think we can say with great confidence that the person who believes in the creation of the universe out of nothing stands solidly within mainstream science today. Minimally, we can say that. And that's quite different from the previous 2,000 years of speculation about the origin of the universe.
What is the cosmological argument for the existence of God?
The cosmological argument is actually a family of arguments, different arguments, that all attempt to prove, on the basis of the existence of the world, that there is some sort of a first cause or sufficient reason for the existence of the world.
And what are some of the subsets of these arguments?
What were some of the arguments for the beginning of the universe? Well, let's let one of the greatest medieval champions of the doctrine of creation speak for himself. Al-Ghazali was a 12th century Muslim theologian from Persia, or modern-day Iran. And he was concerned that Muslim philosophers of his day were being influenced by Greek philosophy to deny the beginning of the universe. They held that the universe flows necessarily out of God and is therefore beginningless. After thoroughly studying the teachings of these philosophers, Al-Ghazali wrote a devastating critique of their views called The Incoherence of the Philosophers. And in this fascinating book, he argues that it is impossible that the universe be beginningless. The universe must have a beginning, he argues, and since nothing begins to exist without a cause, there must therefore be a transcendent creator of the universe. Ghazali frames his argument very simply. Let me quote him. He says, "Every being which begins has a cause for its beginning. Now the world is a being which begins. Therefore, it possesses a cause for its beginning." And we can summarize Ghazali's reasoning in three simple steps. One, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Two, the universe began to exist. Three, therefore, the universe has a cause. This argument is so marvelously simple that it's easy to memorize and share with another person. Moreover, this is a logically airtight argument. If the two premises are true, then the conclusion follows necessarily. So I'd like to look at this argument with you this morning more closely, starting with the second premise, that the universe began to exist. During the Middle Ages, before the rise of modern science, people had no scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. But Ghazali presented
some ingenious philosophical arguments for why the past has to be finite. For example, Ghazali points out that if the universe never began to exist, then the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. Think about it. If the universe never began to exist, then the number of past events is infinite. But, Al-Ghazali argued, this is impossible because an actually infinite number of things cannot exist. The way in which Ghazali shows the impossibility of an actually infinite number of things is by imagining what it would be like if such a collection could exist and then drawing out the absurd consequences from it. Let me share with you one of my favorite illustrations called Hilbert's Hotel, which is the brainchild of the great German mathematician David Hilbert. Now, as a warm-up, Hilbert first invites us to imagine an ordinary hotel with a finite number of rooms. And let's suppose that all the rooms are full. If a new guest shows up at the front desk asking for a room, the manager apologizes, sorry, all the rooms are full, and the guest has to be turned away. But now, Hilbert said, let's imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. And let's suppose, once again, that all the rooms are full. Now, this fact has to be clearly appreciated. There is not a single vacancy throughout the entire infinite hotel. Every room already has a guest in it. Okay? Now, stay with me here. Suppose a new guest shows up at the front desk asking for a room. What will the manager say? No problem, he says. And he moves the guest who was staying in room 1 into room 2. He moves the guest who was in room 2 into room 3. He moves the guest who was in room 3 into room 4, and so on, out to infinity, so that everybody moves into the room number next highest to his own. As a result, room number 1 now becomes vacant, and the new guest is easily accommodated. And yet, before he arrived, all the rooms were already full. Now, if that seems weird, hang on to your hat because it gets even worse. Let's suppose, Hilbert says, that an infinity of new guests shows up at the front desk asking for rooms. No problem, says the manager. And he moves the guest who was staying in room 1 into room 2. He moves the guest who was in room 2 into room 4. He moves the guest who was in room 3 into room 6, putting each guest into the room number twice his own. 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 3 into 6, 4 into 8, and so on, out to infinity. Now, think about that. Since any number multiplied by 2 is always an even number, all of the guests wind up in the even numbered rooms, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so forth. As a result, all of the odd numbered rooms become vacant, and the infinity of new guests gratefully checks in. And yet, before they arrived, all the rooms were already full. In fact, the proprietor could do this an infinite number of times and always be able to accommodate more guests. As one student remarked to me after class, Hilbert's Hotel, if it could exist, would have to have a sign posted outside. No vacancy. Guests welcome. Hilbert's Hotel is absurd. Mind you, it's logically correct for the mathematician, but it's impossible for something like Hilbert's Hotel to really exist. You can describe it on paper, but it cannot exist in reality.
For the existence of God. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Innal hamdulillah was salatu was salamu ala rasulillah. To proceed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In a short clip, we're going to be discussing the Quranic argument for God's existence. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran in chapter 52 verses 35 to 36 specifically about the creation of the human being, the thing that began to exist, the thing that was originated. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? Bal la yuqinun. Indeed, rather they have no true faith, no true conviction. Now the mufassirun, which means the scholars who did tafsir, did exegesis, did an explanation of the Quran, say that there are some logical explanations for things that begin to exist. Not just the human being, but everything that begins to exist. So let's apply this to the universe. Since we know the universe began to exist based on cosmology, based on mathematics, based on the concept of the infinity, we don't have to get into the technicalities. The universe began to exist. Then we could apply the four logical possibilities. And what are these four logical possibilities? Number one, it came from nothing. Number two, it created itself. Number three, it was created by something else created. Or number four, it was created by something uncreated. So let's do this quickly together. Number one, could it come from nothing? Well, let's look at this mathematically. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is equal to 0. No matter what you do with 0, no matter what you do with nothing, all you're going to get is 0, nothing. So we know the universe couldn't come from nothing. Well, could the universe create itself? Well, this is very interesting. Let me ask you a question. Could you give birth to yourself? Of course not, because that would mean that you were in existence and not in existence at the same time. Another question follows, did your mother give birth to herself? I mean, this is an impossibility. So we know self-creation is impossible because it would mean that the universe was in existence and not in existence at the same time. Impossible. Number three, could the universe be created by something else created? Well, this doesn't make sense, as the famous scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah's mercy be upon him, said that you can't have an infinite regress of causes. Big language, I know, but what does it really mean? It basically means that how could a cause get its causal power from a previous cause, and that cause to get its causal power from a previous cause? If that goes on forever, you will never have the cause in the first place, you will never have existence. Let me make it very simple for you. Imagine I'm a little kid with a water gun and I want to spray my little brother. In order to spray my little brother, I have to ask permission from someone behind me. If that goes on forever, am I going to spray my little brother? No. So ultimately, we know that the universe couldn't have been created by something else created. So it leads to the final option, which is the best explanation, that the universe was created by something uncreated. But it doesn't mean it's God. It doesn't mean it's Allah or any of the 4,000 names we've disagreed about since 6,000 BC Sumeria. But if we keep on using our minds, as the Quran says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, for those who use their brain and intellect, those who reflect, we continue this Quranic view, this Quranic approach, we can conclude some striking things. Number one, this uncreated creator must be powerful. There are billions of atoms in the universe. Split just one atom, you have an entire release of energy, an atomic explosion. So the creator, the uncreated creator, must be powerful. It must be intelligent or knowing. Why? Because it created laws in the universe like the law of gravity. And someone who creates a law implies a lawgiver. And a lawgiver implies knowledge or intelligence. It must be transcendent. What does that mean? It means it must be outside of the universe, not made of the universe. As the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, there is nothing like unto him. For example, if I build a chair, do I become the chair? Of course not. The other perspective is that this uncreated creator must be eternal. Why? Because it's uncreated. If it's uncreated, it never began to exist, it's always been there. The other point is, this uncreated creator must have a will, meaning he must be able to have choice and be able to choose things to come into existence. Simple reason, because it's knowing and intelligent and eternal. And it brought into existence the universe that began. It can only mean it chose the universe to come into existence. Finally, as the Quran says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say Allah is uniquely one. This uncreated creator must be one. You could sense this within yourself as part of your fitrah, part of your innate nature, your innate disposition, but also because it's the best and most comprehensive explanation. To say God is 2 or 3 is irrational, because it creates far more questions than it solves. Like, how on earth do 2 or 3 co-eternal beings coexist? It's irrational and doesn't add value to the explanation. So what we've done is we've summarized God's existence in just a couple of minutes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
The answer is, why does something exist rather than nothing? This is why the Quran, which is the book of the Muslims, also states, do they think the universe came out of nothing? Now we can respond to this perennial question by positing a cause for the universe, or claiming that the universe is uncaused. Well, let's take the atheist conclusion, which generally is that the universe is a brute fact. For example, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist philosopher, he said in the 1960s on a radio program, the universe is just there and that's all. It's a brute reality. But if that is the case, that would imply and indicate that the universe is eternal. And if the universe is eternal, it would mean that the universe has an infinite history of past events. Now let's question this. Can there be an infinite number of anything in the real world? Well, from a philosophical position, it doesn't make sense. It leads to absurdities. As the philosophers say, there is no ontological export of the concept of the infinite into the real world. Now let me give you some examples for you to understand this better. Imagine we have an infinite number of Richard Dawkins in this room. Okay? And say I took 10 Richard Dawkins away. How many Richard Dawkins do we have left? Infinity or infinity minus 10. Whatever position we take, we should practically be able to count how many Richard Dawkins there are in this room, but we can't. It leads to absurdities. Another example. Imagine there are 100 Richard Dawkins in this room, and at every possible moment, I add another Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins 101, Richard Dawkins 102, Richard Dawkins 1,000,001, and so forth. Will I ever reach a number of Richard Dawkins which we can describe as infinite? No, because we could always add another Richard Dawkins. So what does this say to us? This says to us that the infinite in the real world doesn't exist. In the mathematical realm of discourse, it exists because it's based on certain axioms and conventions. But in the real world, it simply doesn't exist. This is why mathematicians Kasman and Newman, they said the infinite certainly does not exist in the same sense that we say there are fish in the sea. Also, the famous German mathematician David Hilbert, he said the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea. But brothers, sisters and friends, events are not just ideas, they are real things. Therefore, the number of events in the universe cannot be infinitely long. They must be finite. And that would indicate that there must have been a beginning to the universe. And if the universe had a beginning, therefore it must have a cause. Now this is supported by scientific evidence, astrophysical evidence. Has everyone heard of the Big Bang? Put your hands up. Claim to prophethood. So I'm going to go straight to the first argument, God's existence. Now brothers, sisters and friends, God makes sense of the origins of the universe. Because we have all asked the same question, why does something exist rather than nothing? How did the universe come to being? In this light, the Quran, the book of the Muslims, points to this type of thinking. As the Quran says, or do they think the heavens and the earth, the whole universe, came out of nothing? Now typically, atheists have responded by saying that the universe is just eternal and uncaused. For example, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist on a radio program, he said the universe is just there and that's all. However, brothers, sisters and friends, if we conclude, or if we scratch the surface on this statement, we will conclude that it is absurd and irrational. because that would mean that the universe never had a beginning, which would then mean that our history is infinite, that the universe has an infinite history of past events. But I ask you the question, can this really be the case? Can we have an infinite history? The answer is no, because the infinite does not exist in the real world. Take the following examples into consideration. Example number 1. Say we have an infinite number of Dr. Ed Buckners in the room, okay? Whether we like that or not, okay? Say we take 2 Dr. Ed Buckners away, how many Dr. Ed Buckners do we have left? Infinite, as Dr. Ed Buckner has just said. But logically, it's infinity minus 2. And if it's infinity minus 2, it's less than infinity. And if it's less than infinity, we should be able to count how many Dr. Ed Buckners are in the room. But we can't. It just exists in the mathematical realm of discussion, of discourse. Example number 2. Now say we have 100 Dr. Ed Buckners in the room. And at every possible moment, I add another Dr. Ed Buckner. 101, 102, 1001, 1002, 1,001, 1,000,002. Will I ever reach a number that we can describe as infinite? No, because at every possible moment, I can add another Dr. Ed Buckner. So, in this light, the mathematicians Kasman and Newman, they said the infinite certainly does not exist in the same sense as we say there are fish in the sea. And significantly, brothers, sisters, and friends, the famous German mathematician David Hilbert, he said the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature, nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea. But brothers, sisters, and friends, past events are real. They're not just ideas. Therefore, the number of past events cannot be infinite. Therefore, there was a beginning to the universe, and it logically follows there was a cause to the universe. This is why leading cosmologists and philosophers of science such as Ellis, Kirchner, and Stoger, they ask and they answer in the following way. They said, can there be an infinite set of really existing universes? We suggest that on the basis of well-known philosophical arguments, the answer is no. Now, this may sound like philosophical mumbo-jumbo. Let's talk about science, okay? What does astrophysical evidence have to say? What does science have to say about this? Now, I would argue that this conclusion is also supported by physics. As you know, you've heard of the Big Bang. Everyone heard of the Big Bang? Hands? Good, and I assure you it's not that thing that happens after too many curries. Okay, according to the Big Bang, physical time and space was created and matter and energy were also created. The 4 prominent scientists, J. Richards, James E. Gunn, David N. Schramm, and Beatrice M. Tinley, they describe the event of the Big Bang as follows. The universe began from a state of infinite density, space and time were created in that event, and so was all matter in the universe. I ask you another question. What does infinite density actually mean? Well, it actually means nothing. This is why Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle, he states that the universe at a point in the past was shrunk down to nothing at all. So let's reflect on this. It would actually mean that a proponent of the Big Bang theory or model would require us to believe that something comes from nothing. I ask you another question. Does something come from nothing? No, because out of nothing, nothing comes. This is why even atheist philosophers such as David Hume, he wrote in a letter, I never asserted to absurd proposition as that anything might arise without a cause. Similarly, P.J. Zort in his publication About Time said, if there is anything we find inconceivable, it is that something could arise from nothing. And we even have the eminent physicist, Sir Arthur Eddington, concluding, the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. So we can conclude based on mathematical, philosophical, and scientific evidence that there's a cause for the universe. It doesn't mean it's God, doesn't mean it's Jesus, doesn't mean it's Allah, it doesn't mean anything. It just means there's a cause for the universe. So we ask another question. What is the nature of this cause? And the nature of this cause, upon conceptual analysis, which means critical thinking about this cause, we come to some startling conclusions. This cause must be one. The reason for this is because if we use the philosophical principle Occam's razor, which posits that we do not multiply entities beyond necessity, then we conclude it must be one. This cause must be uncaused, as we have already discussed the absurdity of an infinite regress of events, similarly with causes. This cause must be immaterial, because it created the sum of all matter, which is the universe itself. Significantly, brothers, sisters, and friends, this cause must be personal. The reason I'm saying this is how else can an eternal cause bring into an existence a finite effect, the universe that had a beginning in time? It must have chosen the universe to come into existence, and choice indicates a will, and a will indicates a personality. So, we have concluded the traditional view on God, that a transcendental, immaterial, uncaused, eternal being exists. Let me summarize the argument for you. 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore the universe has a cause.
So the 2013 charts of Google's most popular searches in Australia are just in, with the top Google search at #1 being "What is twerking?", shortly followed by "Who is God?". Now, on saying this, I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out which of the two questions is more important to be asking Google. I mean, one could potentially explain the reality of our existence, while the other would potentially leave us scarred for the remainder of our existence. And look, I know there's a lot of skepticism surrounding this issue, and quite frankly, I don't blame you. I mean, the meaning of God has been thrown around so often we forgot what it means. From some Zeus-like man in the sky with a big beard, to Thor, to a half-animal, half-human creature, to Kanye West shamelessly producing a track titled "I Am God" on his album Yeezus, to Eminem then self-proclaiming himself as the rap god, a new brand of clothing titled "I Am God," and who could forget Justin Bieber and his Believers.
You affectionately refer to your fans as beaners.
No, believers.
And now I understand that most of this may be exaggerated, and many of these examples are mere semantics and plays on words that are probably being taken out of context, as let's face it, nobody actually believes in Bieber, and I highly doubt that Kanye West considers himself a god.
When someone comes up and says something like, "I am a god," everybody says, "Who does he think he is?" I just told you who I thought I was, a god.
And now Kanye West smashes his head into a street sign really, really hard.
Oh! Kanye!
Oh, Kanye.
Kanye, you okay?
Sounds like Kay's got a new hit.
A god! That's who I think I am.
Kanye,
you okay?
So with all these misconstrued definitions of God, the least I could do is help clear the water and help us finally find out who is God. Well, to begin, let's start with the things that we all agree on. First and foremost, we're here. We just began and we exist. And like all things that begin to exist, they require a cause. Things don't just come out of nothing, and although at times we sometimes wish they would, they don't.
If I told you that this glass sprang into existence, this glass made itself, you said Muhammad Ali's crazy.
So in saying that, knowing the cause of us is crucial to understanding who God is. Although we are able to explain that we did have a beginning, as many leading cosmologists have affirmed, we are still left unanswered as to what was the cause of our beginning. And before you lash out saying, "Oh, but we can't see what happened before we began," or "you can't prove there was a creator," we say quite openly, neither can you disprove a creator. And by observing the reality of our world and our existence, its order, its structure, and the systems, I see no reason not to believe in a creator. But then one may ask, where did this creator come from? What was the cause of him? And it will go on forever and ever, which would most probably lead to us never have ever been created. So for God to exist, he must exist without a beginning, therefore not requiring a cause, making him eternal. He should also be transcendent from his creation and not bound by any of the realms he had created, whether it is time, space, or matter. For instance, when Steve Jobs makes an iPhone, he doesn't become the iPhone, he is separate. And of course we could also argue that he is one, This makes the most sense, and it would also avoid any potential conflict between two disputing all-powerful gods with conflicting interests. But we still don't know which god is he.
Are you Zeus? Are you Thor? Are you Yahweh?
Well, if you agree with everything I've said up until now, you will realize that each of these gods don't fit into our established criteria of who God is. They are all created beings, they are not eternal, they have not created anything, they are dependent, and they require sleep, rest, oxygen, and food. So who is the one and only true God? I present to you a God who is one and only, eternal, exists without a beginning, who was uncreated, requiring no cause for himself, yet being the absolute cause and creator of everything else. Allah. A simple definition of God that is logical and rational. There is nothing like him, no man, no creature, nothing imaginable. He is the one who is perfect, although I don't like using the word perfect because our understanding of perfection would never encompass his true essence. He is in control of everything, whereby nothing can harm us unless he wills it. He is the all-knowing, the all-hearing, and unlike our friend Kanye, he is the all-seeing. Many of us would then argue that although these verses do provide a logical and sound concept of God, how do we know that these words are indeed the words of God? Well, first and foremost, the Quran isn't just any book. It was revealed over 1400 years ago as direct revelation from God to the final prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and was sent as the most eloquent piece of literature to before mankind. Revealed at a time where poetry was rife and to a population housing the best of poets, only to leave them speechless and at a loss for words. Now, what is important to note is that the Quran doesn't fit in any of the known classes of poetry nor prose. Rather, it is a fusion of both that even to this day shake the hearts of Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
It's almost trance-like. I mean, you can hear it's very euphonic. I mean, there's a lot of internal rhyme and end rhyme, and the rhythm is not predictable, and it's beautiful.
Even to this day, the Quran remains incomparable and stuns humanity with its accurate references to science and history. From accurate descriptions of the human embryo to historically accurate references to the different rulers in the different Egyptian dynasties. And no matter how many times people will try to discredit the Quran on its authenticity, it remains standing.
Will you please, at the very next science lesson, get some salt water, get some fresh water, and mix them and see what happens?
The Quran says 2 seas, not 2 cups of water. And to those that doubt it is from God, the challenge is simple. Bring forth something that can compare. And now, although this challenge has been attempted multiple times throughout the past, history has witnessed that no man has been able to rival the Quran. But does this challenge still apply today? Well, we could surely put it to the test, and who better to choose than the self-proclaimed rap god.
Call yourself the rap god.
Eminem, dubbed the best of his time, being incomparable with anyone in his league.
The last thing the world needs is another me.
Now, if we compare the works of Allah with the works of Eminem, we are left with this. Stickity gibbity hippity hip hop rappity rap packing a mac in the back of the act pack back rap yak yakity yak yak at the exact same time I attempt these lyrical acrobat stunts. Look, content-wise, I don't know. However, we can't deny that lyrically he is impressive. He has rhythm, rhyme, style, alliteration, and assonance. A short video online even indicates that in one of his songs he almost made every second to third word rhyme. But how does he compare with the Quran's smallest chapter of 3 verses, Surah Al-Kawthar? Now, in just 10 words, Allah is able to use over 30 linguistic and rhetorical devices, including emphasis, multiple meaning, grammatical shift, word order and arrangement, ellipsis, conceptual relatedness, intensification, choice of words, repetition, intimacy, exaggeration, and prophecy, along with many, many more. What's also important to note is that the linguistic devices in the Quran aren't just thrown about randomly. For instance, Allah would use palindromes strategically to describe the terms glorify your Lord and the orbiting of planets, as though both processes are occurring continuously, non-stop, one after the other. The shortest chapter in the Quran also contains a rhetorical device that no one can compete against nor replicate: prophecy. At the end of the first verse, Allah promises Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he would be given abundant good at a time when he was at one of the lowest points of his life, with a small amount of followers and low social status. He had even just lost his son, and his enemies were taunting him with cut-off lineage and progeny, yet Allah was promising him abundant good at this time. Such was the prophecy of the Quran, and we certainly indeed see its fulfillment today. With the Quran being the most recited, memorized and practiced book across the entire world, with over 1.6 billion followers today from all walks of life. Now I know many of you are probably thinking, okay, cool story bro, but what's the purpose of the Quran? Well, the importance is that it gives meaning to life. From our overall purpose of existence, to why we're here, and what happens once we die. God teaches us that each and every single one of us is being tested. We weren't created for mere play, we were created with a purpose, and that is to be obedient to God and His rules. Those who believe, there is reward, and those that don't and are arrogant, there is a punishment. And look, I apologize for trying to squeeze all this into one small video, but I've given you everything you need to know who God is and why we are here. So read.
Matter somewhere in the void of space. It was not just matter that was created during the Big Bang. It was space and time that were created. So in the sense that time had a beginning, space also has a beginning. So in this light, there are only three possible explanations for the existence of the universe. Number one, the universe came out of nothing. Number two, the universe created itself. Number three, or the universe has a creator or a cause. Now, let's take the first one into consideration, brothers, sisters, and friends. We know the universe couldn't have come out of nothing, because out of nothing, nothing comes. This is why P.J. Zwart, in his publication About Time, states, if there is anything we can find inconceivable, is that it is something could arise from nothing. Also, we know that the universe couldn't have created itself, because that would imply a paradox. Can your mother give birth to herself? Can this whole auditorium create itself? Can I exist and not exist at the same time? Can the doctor exist and not exist at the same time? This is a paradox, a logical impossibility. Things cannot exist and not exist at the same time. This is why you cannot have self-creation. Therefore, the best explanation, brothers, sisters, and friends, is that the universe has a creator or has a cause. But all we know from this argument is that there's a cause or there's a creator. We can't claim it's Allah, we can't claim it's Buddha, we can't claim it's Jesus, we can't claim any of the terms we have used, approximately 3,800 names for God since 6000 BC Sumeria. We've differed about God. God knows. That was supposed to be a joke. Please laugh. That's good. The joke's on me then. But if we use our reasoning, as the Quran says, the book of the Muslims, to use our minds, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, do you not use your minds? We will come to the conclusion that this cause is in line with the Islamic narrative of God. For instance, since this cause created the universe, which includes time and space, it must be one. Because if we claim it's 2, if we claim it's 3, if we claim it's 300, if we claim it's 3,000, it creates far more questions than it answers. So the simplest explanation is the best explanation. This is a principle in philosophy called Occam's razor, which really means do not multiply entities beyond necessity, because you'll have a huge task of trying to answer more questions than you've answered. Also, it must be uncaused, because there is an absurdity of an infinite regress. Big words, I know. What does this really mean? Say, for example, I wanted to give Dr. Lars Güler a kiss on the cheek. That's another joke. So imagine I want to give him a kiss on the cheek, but I had to ask his wife for permission. And she says, you know what? I can't give you permission because the person behind me has to give me permission. And the person behind that person has to give that person permission. If that went on forever, will I ever give him a kiss? Unfortunately not.
So this is the same case with the universe. The creator must be uncreated. The cause for the universe must be uncaused. Also, this creator, this cause must be immaterial, which basically means outside of the universe, outside of the material world. As the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like unto him. And the reason for this is because since this creator created space and time, and within space and time is the sum of all material, then it must be outside of space and time, which means it's outside of everything that's material. Most significantly, brothers, sisters and friends, and this is very important, this creator, this cause must have a will. So it must be able to have a personal relationship with conscious beings in the universe. There's many reasons for this I'm going to articulate during the rebuttal or during the question and answers, but let me give you some points to consider. The reason this creator cause must be personal, because if it's eternal and uncaused, and it brought into existence an effect that began, it must have chose the universe to come into existence. And choice indicates a will, and a will indicates it can interact with conscious beings. This is very profound, because if you claim this cause is just mechanical, then all mechanical causes exist with their effect. But if this cause is eternal and brought into being the universe at a certain point, therefore it chose for the universe to come into existence. Another argument is, put your right hand up. That's proof that an immaterial cause can bring something into existence. Our minds are immaterial. So, this is in line with what the Quran says in the 112th chapter. The Quran says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. As the Quran says, say, He is God, the one, the unique, the absolute, God the eternal. He begets not, nor was He begotten, and there is nothing like Him. So we have good reasons to believe that God exists.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, Not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
Bismillah. The most important questions that we should be thinking about as humans. Did we exist by chance? Is there a God? And where did we come from? It's either that we have came from nothing, or we created ourselves, or something else have created us. As far as whether we came from nothing, that violated the laws of physics and the law of conservation of energy. Nothing comes from nothing, and something always comes from something else. Did we create ourselves? It's like that we're saying that we exist and don't exist in the same time. Or, it's like saying that our mothers have given birth to themselves. Do you know that the age of our universe is 13 billion years? But the time it takes to create one simple human protein by chance, 634 million billion years. That's the age of our universe multiplied by 45 millions. And you still think you came by chance? Do you know that human beings are made out of 18.5% carbon, 3.3% nitrogen, 9.5% hydrogen, and 65% oxygen? For an average human being, that's about 14 gallons of water, 26 pounds of charcoal, and 3 pounds of air. If we pour all that in one bag, for how many years do we need to shake this bag to come up with a human being? And you still think you came by chance? With all the current technology that we have, we were not able to create a robot that is as perfect and as sophisticated as a human being. With all the technology that we have, we were not able to create a camera closer to the human eye, 576 pixels. With all the technology that we have, we were not able to create a heart closer to the human heart that could pump 7,200 liters of blood daily without any complications. With all the technology that we have, we're not able to create kidneys that could work 24/7, filtering 180 liters of blood daily and cleaning human blood from toxins continuously. And you still think you came by chance? Or something else have created you? A creator that once said, يا أيها الناس ضرب مثل فاستمعوا له إن الذين تدعون من دون الله لن يخلقوا ذبابا ولو اجتمعوا له. O people, listen to this example. You are not able to create one single fly, even if all of you united for this purpose. A creator that once said, ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت. You will not see faults in the creation of the most merciful. A creator that's all powerful. A creator that's all-knowing. A creator that unlike his creation. Allah, the Lord of Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad. If someone have given you $1 million, you be thankful for him for the rest of your life. But what about the one who have given you blessings that were worth millions? Shouldn't you worship him? Shouldn't you submit to him? If you have questions about Islam, do yourself a favor and ask a Muslim. Please like.
I think that Darwin's theory is nonsense because everything has a beginning. So where did these cells originally come from? There must be a creator who created everything. So again, this is an issue that's often raised. How do you get around that debate about point of origin?
It's really rather silly, isn't it? Because it leaves open the question of where the creator came from. You haven't explained anything at all if you simply invoke a creator to say, where did the first cells come from, or where does the first atoms come from? That won't do that kind of explanation. Actually, it's much worse an explanation to say that there's a creator, because the creator would have to be a great, big, intelligent, complicated thing, which is the very kind of thing that we in science are trying to explain, and to a very large extent succeeding. Even without the Darwinian explanation, design is a very bad explanation for the complexity of life, because it's got a regression built into it. I mean, you have to explain the design error, and so it's not even a good explanation.
In order to recognize that an explanation is the best, you don't have to have an explanation of the explanation. In order to recognize that an explanation is the best, you don't have to be able to explain the explanation. Folks, this is an elementary point in the philosophy of science. Suppose astronauts were to find on the backside of the moon a pile of machinery there that had not been left by American or Russian cosmonauts. What would be the best explanation for that machinery? Well, clearly it would be some sort of extraterrestrial intelligence that had left the machinery there. And you don't have to have an explanation of who these extraterrestrials were or came from or how they got there or anything of that sort in order to recognize that the best explanation of this machinery is intelligent design. In order to recognize an explanation as the best, you don't have to have an explanation of the explanation. In fact, when you think about it, requiring that would immediately lead to an infinite regress of explanations. You would need an explanation of the explanation, but in order to recognize that as best, you need an explanation of the explanation of the explanation, and then an explanation of the explanation of the explanation of the explanation. And so that nothing could ever be explained.
One of the outdated philosophical cliches, in my opinion, is that, well, who created God? We hear that all the time, and they think it's a baseball bat against the theists. But it's made of sponge. And let me tell you why. If we say, what caused the cause that caused the universe, then let's continue. What caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the universe? Let's continue. Then what caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the universe? Let's carry on. Then what caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the cause that caused?
And that goes on and on and on backwards. But at one point, I have to have an uncaused cause, or there would be nothing in existence today. Think of a string of dominoes. You have a domino that knocks over a domino that knocks over a domino. I have to have a first domino, or that string of falling could never start.
So in essence, to claim who created God or what caused the cause of the universe is the equivalent of saying that we don't have a universe. That we don't have a universe. That we don't have a universe.
Remember the premises of the argument I gave. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being out of nothing. But if something is eternal and timeless, then it doesn't fall under that first premise. It doesn't need a cause. And the concept of God is the concept of an eternal, self-existent, necessary being, and therefore the answer is simply that God is uncaused.
لو قلنا كل حاجة ليها مصدر، والمصدر نفسه له مصدر، وهنفضل كده المصدر له مصدر والمصدر له مصدر، هنفضل بهذه الطريقة إلى ما لا نهاية. إذا منطقيا إن التسلسل ده لازم يمتنع، لازم يوصل لمصدر ليس له مصدر، وده اللي بنسميه المصدر الأول. إذا هذا الأول يجب يكون قبل بداية الزمان، لأنه لو بعد الزمان يبقى هو نفسه له بداية، يبقى يوجد ما قبله. لكن هذا المصدر الأول قبل الزمان، وبالتالي قبل المكان. بدون الشمس والقمر والكواكب والنجوم مش هيبقى فيه ليل ونهار، مش هيبقى فيه أيام وشهور، يبقى مش هيبقى فيه زمان. إذن الزمان والمكان بدأوا مع بعض. وده اللي العلم قالوا ان بالانفجار الكوني العظيم اللي اسمه البيج بانج بدأ الزمان والمكان مع بعض، سبيس اند تايم. بالتالي هذا الاول موجود من قبل الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر والنجوم، يبقى موجود من قبل الزمان والمكان. هذا المصدر الاول هو من خلق الزمان والمكان. ربنا سبحانه وتعالى بيقول في القرآن الكريم: وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر. شوفوا الوصف القرآني دقيق ازاي لمسألة الخلق والدمج بين المكان والزمان. خلق السماوات والأرض مكان، بالحق يكور الليل على النهار ويكور النهار على الليل زمان، وسخر الشمس والقمر كل يجري لأجل مسمى. إذا الأول الذي لم يخلق هو اللي خلق كل شيء في السماوات والأرض، هو الله. فلو سألنا من هو خالق الزمان لأنه خلق الشمس والقمر والنجوم، نقول إيه؟ الله. لو سألنا من خالق كل ما في السماوات والأرض، الله. لو سألنا من هو الأول الذي خلق ولم يخلق، الله. ينفع بقى نسأل بعد كل ده من خلق الله؟ لا، لأنه هو الذي خلق ولم يخلق. لو قلنا من الذي خلقه يبقى هو مخلوق، يبقى مش هو الله. هناك فرق يا جماعة بين الحدث الأول والسبب الأول. الحدث الأول هو الانفجار العظيم البيج بانج، لكن السبب الأول هو اللي فجر هذا الانفجار، هو خالق الانفجار العظيم، هو الله. وعلماء الفلسفة حددوا صفات لهذا السبب. قالوا لازم يكون قبل الزمان والمكان والطاقة. إذن ما ينفعش يبقى الطبيعة هي خالقة الكون، لأن الطبيعة هي الزمان والمكان والطاقة. لابد أن يكون قبل الزمان والمكان والطاقة، يبقى هو الأول، هو السبب الأول. يجب كمان يكون مطلق القدرة، omnipotent، بلغة القرآن على كل شيء قدير. قالوا كمان علماء الفلسفة أنه لازم يكون قادر على اتخاذ القرارات، ليتخذ قرار الخلق بعد العدم. قالوا كمان يكون لازم عنده رؤية مستقبلية، يعلم المستقبل. قالوا انه لازم يكون مطلق الذكاء، وقالوا انه لازم يكون واحد، وهذا هو الخالق. فلما حد يسأل بعد كل ده مين اللي خلق الخالق الأول، يبقى السؤال نفسه غلط.
I want to address the who designed the designer question, because it's the old schoolboy question, who created God. I'm actually very surprised to find it as a central argument in your book, because it assumes that God is created. And I'm not surprised, therefore, that you call the book The God Delusion, because created gods are by definition a delusion. Now, I know, and I ought to explain, that Richard doesn't like people who say to him that they don't believe in the God he doesn't believe in. But I think that this is possibly touching a sore spot, because you leave yourself wide open to the charge. After all, you are arguing that God is a delusion. And in order to weigh your argument, I said that it is you who's arguing that God is a delusion.
Oh, sorry. All right.
And in order to weigh that argument, I need to know what you mean by God. And if you say, if there is a God, you have to ask who created God, that means that you're reduced to thinking about created gods. Well, none of us believe in created gods, Jews, Muslims, or Christians. And I think that argument then is entirely beside the point, and perhaps you ought to put it on your shelf marked celestial teapots where it belongs. The God who created the universe, ladies and gentlemen, was not created. He is eternal.
That if Quran is the word of God, who is the creator of God? Very good question. If I ask you, brother, that your friend John, he gave birth to a child. Can you guess the child was girl or a boy? Your friend John gave birth to a child in the hospital. Can you guess was it a girl or a boy? Guess, guess.
No.
Girl or a boy?
I can't guess.
Sorry?
I may not guess.
Try. At least 50% you'll get right.
Yeah, 50%. 1/2 chance.
Okay, tell me.
Boy.
Boy. Whether can a man give birth to a child?
No.
So is it a girl or a boy?
But the name can be for a female.
I'm asking you, your friend John. I don't know anyone female called by John.
No, we can call.
No. Okay, suppose a friend who is a boy is a man. He went to hospital. He gave birth to a child. Was it a girl or a boy?
Girl.
Can a man give birth to a child, brother?
No.
Now you understood. A man can't give birth to a child. So where's the question of it being girl or a boy? So by definition, God is uncreated. So a question, who is the creator of God, is like I asking you a question. Your friend who's a man, he gave birth to a child, is it a girl or a boy? The question is illogical. Because by definition, a man cannot give birth to a child. So where's the question of girl or a boy? So by definition, God is uncreated. Every created thing has a creator. God does not have a creator. Therefore, in my argument with the atheist, I never ever said that everything has a creator. I said every created thing has a creator. But the God is uncreated. By definition, the moment I mention who is the creator of God, he is not God. Therefore, by definition, God is uncreated. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you.
Frank, one objection we hear from time to time is when we talk about this idea that, you know, we believe that this universe that we live in was created, then people will say, well, then who created God?
Yeah, that's a great question that turns out to be a bad question, because if you think about it long enough, if God is uncreated, then he didn't have a beginning. Look, there has to be an uncaused first cause. There's two possibilities. Either the universe is the uncaused first cause, or something that is beyond the universe is the uncaused first cause. And all the evidence shows, both the philosophical and scientific evidence, shows that space, matter, and time had a beginning. In other words, the universe had a cause. It had a beginning, so it must have had a cause, which means whatever's outside the universe must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, must be that first cause. Now, if you're timeless, do you have a cause? No, you're eternal. So whatever created the universe is the uncaused first cause. It didn't have a beginning. You know, it amazes me too, Bobby, that a lot of atheists have a lot of trouble believing in an eternal God. Yet for centuries they believed in an eternal universe, and they had no problem believing in an eternal universe. But somehow when an eternal God comes up, they go, oh, that can't be. No, the evidence points to the fact that it can be. In fact, there has to be something that's eternal. Even Aristotle knew this. There has to be an unmoved mover.
Aristotle, on the other hand, he argued regarding the principle of infinite regression, meaning you have a creator, that creator has a creator. If we narrow everything down, we come down to one creator. And then, who created that creator? We say, another one like him. Then who created that one? Another one like him. And who created that one? Another one like him. And you just keep going till when? Till infinity. You can just keep going back to infinity. Aristotle argued that no, to argue that is to say that things didn't have a beginning. If the beginning is infinity, it's like saying there is no beginning. So if there's no beginning, how did we get here? Our existence is evidence that things have a beginning. That is how Aristotle argued. And in the Quran, we find it mentioned in Surah Tur, where Allah says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves? Self-creation, not possible. Creation from nothing, that nothing would create us? No. There has to be a creator. So this is reasonable and logical. With regards to those sub-questions, if everything has a creator, who created God? That was Aristotle's answer. God had to be without a creator. He had to have no beginning, and that's a basic characteristic of God, that he has no beginning and he has no end. If he had a beginning, then he's no different from the rest of us, needing somebody else to create him. And if the one who created him didn't have a beginning, it had a beginning, then he's like the rest of us. So obviously, to start this whole process going, there had to be one without a beginning who started the ball rolling. So the question, who created God, is in fact an illogical question.
هو ليه الإجابة دي بنفهمها بس مش بتريحنا 100%؟ ليه بنرجع كل شوية نسأل نفس السؤال؟ أنا لما أقول لك الله رحيم مفهومة، لأن عندك حد رحيم في حياتك بتقيس عليه. أول ما بقولك الله رحيم، أنت شفت في الدنيا رحماء زي ماما، زي قطة بتعطف على أطفالها. بالتالي لما أقولك الله رحيم مش مستغربة بالنسبة لك، لأن الرحمة معنى موجود في حياتك أنت شايفه. كذلك لو قلت لك الله غفار، هتفتكر حد تعرفه يكون بيسامح ومش بيزعل بسرعة، فبتفهم عندك حاجة تقيس عليها. لكن لما أقول لك إن الله موجود قبل الزمان والمكان، هذا كلام صعب تصوره، لأن ملوش مثيل عندنا في أذهاننا وفي حياتنا نقيس عليه. يبقى يصعب تصور هذا، لكن يمكن تعقله، ممكن أفهمه بعقلي لكن مش قادر أتصوره. هو ده سبب إن الإجابة على سؤال من خلق الله مش بيريح 100%، لأننا بنعقلها لكن مش بنتصورها.
I think Dawkins has a perfectly legitimate case there. Now, I want to say equally that I think the theologian or the religious person or the philosopher, and to a certain extent this is a turf war, I think that they have equal right to turn to Dawkins and say, look, if you're going to criticize this stuff, fair enough, but try to make an effort to understand what the position is. Now, I think a classic case would be Dawkins going after the cosmological argument, the causal argument. The causal argument, you know, everything has a cause, the world is a thing, therefore the world must have a cause, call it God. Okay? You know, philosophy 100 undergraduate response, what caused God? You know, we've all done it. We've all been there. And, you know, I mean, it's a good question, but, you know, it's not the end of the argument. Dawkins then triumphantly says, there you are, bad argument, let's move on.
Well, he in fact thinks he has found a new argument that disproves God to a high probability.
Right. Push with the cosmological argument for a moment. You know, and I know, that Christians, St. Augustine, certainly St. Thomas, spent a hell of a lot of, I mean, they knew this. And so what they were trying to do was articulate a notion of God who would be first cause. You know, the whole notion of aseity, God as a necessary being, God a se, you know, God's essence is, you know, is his existence. Now, if Dawkins wants to say, as David Hume would say, that the whole notion of necessary being doesn't work or something like that, then let's talk about that. Let's argue that. I mean, I'm inclined to think it might be right. But at least let's, you know, have the honesty, or the intellectual integrity to look at these things and look at the responses that the Christian philosophers, let's say just the Christian philosophers, have made. You may want to rough them up afterwards, but it's like selfish genes. At least do your homework. Now, the trouble with Dawkins is, I think, that he doesn't get to that.
The temptation, which he's alluding to, the design hypothesis, is a false one, because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger question or the larger problem of who designed the designer. But brothers, sisters and friends, the above statement, which is a contention to the design argument we just mentioned, is flawed for many reasons. Firstly, anyone with a basic understanding of the philosophy of science will conclude that in the inference to the best explanation does not require an explanation. Now take the following example into illustration. Imagine 500 years from now, a group of archaeologists start digging in a park in London, and they find parts of a car and a bus. Now, they would be completely justified in inferring that these finds were not the result of sedimentation and metamorphosis, but actually products of an unknown civilization. However, if some skeptics were to come along, for example, Richard Dawkins V, and he were to argue that we couldn't make such inferences because we do not know anything about this civilization, how they lived and who created them, would that make the archaeologist's conclusions untrue? Of course not, because the best explanation doesn't require an explanation. Secondly, if we take this contention seriously, it would undermine the very foundations of science and philosophy themselves. Because if we require an explanation for the basic assumptions of science, for example, that the external world exists, where do you think our level of scientific progress would be? But we wouldn't have any.
Additionally, if we were to apply this type of question to every attempt at explaining the explanation, we would end up with an infinite regression of explanations. And an infinite regression of explanations would defeat the whole purpose of science in the first place, which, brothers, sisters, and friends, is to provide an explanation.